So in this video we're going to be talking about the arrival of the Semitic peoples and how that changes things in Mesopotamia. So one of the things that is a vital geographic effect on the Southwest Asia, otherwise known as the Middle East, is there's this thing called the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent describes essentially Mesopotamia plus the area of the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, what we're going to be referring to as Canaan and Syria. The impact of this is that in this region called the Fertile Crescent, there is a greater ability to have a significant yield in agriculture. The soil, the nature of the land, the rainfall, and so forth is all significantly better than in the surrounding mountainous and desert areas. And so, as a result, we have two things going on. One is that over the course of ancient history, there are significant periods of migration into the Fertile Crescent, most significantly by a number of Semitic peoples during the early and middle Bronze Age, and periodically later on. And also within the Fertile Crescent, there is a great deal of interchange of goods, peoples, and ideas. There's movement around the Fertile Crescent. There's more interaction between Canaan and Mesopotamia than there is overland interaction in other parts of the ancient world. This one of the most famous examples of this, for example, is the patriarch Abraham, who was born in northern Mesopotamia in Assyria, but who migrated around the Fertile Crescent into Canaan at a certain point in his life. And so this means that because this is one of the reasons why Canaan in particular is so valuable, a piece of land which is constantly fought over by the neighboring powers. Whenever there is strong states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and in Anatolia, such as the Hittites, then Canaan is often a battleground and taken back and forth between each of these powers, with the upshot that Canaan itself doesn't tend to generate powers of its own, except when the surrounding regions are dormant. And so, for example, when the Bronze Age powers collapse, in the ensuing couple of centuries, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, and especially the Hebrews are free to create powerful states and economies of their own. And these come to an end when the Assyrians and other powers arise again to try to take control of Canaan. And so, the point of this discussion is that there's a great deal of movement into the Fertile Crescent, in particular into Mesopotamia, once the Sumerian civilization becomes established, and there's a great deal of movement within it. The peoples that move into the Fertile Crescent are of a different history, a different ethnicity, a different language group than the Sumerians. The Sumerians speak a language that is totally unrelated to any of the other languages of the ancient world, and this means that the Semitic peoples that arrive into Mesopotamia during the Bronze Age are, fundamentally alien from the Sumerians that they find there. And so, as these cultures interact, and as the Semites eventually, supersede and absorb the Sumerian lands, cultures, and people, there is a great deal of difficulty involved in the chasm, in the separation between these two heritages and between these two kinds of languages and the worldviews that language provides. All right, so the Semitic peoples that are going to be coming up in coming discussions, the earliest of these are the Akkadians. This is a Semitic people that arrives in central Mesopotamia to the north of Sumer, and these are the first peoples to have interactions with and to overcome and overpower the Sumerian city-states and their culture. Further to the north, beyond the place where the Tigris and Euphrates sort of constrict, come close to each other, and then flare out again. In the northern part of Mesopotamia, the dominant people generally is the Assyrians. These are the people that come ultimately from the city of Ashur. In central Mesopotamia, the Babylonians come to flourish, and there are a number of different peoples that settle in and around Babylon, including the Chaldeans and the Kassites and so forth. To the west, on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, we have several different kinds of Canaanites that are more or less related to each other, including the Hebrews and the Phoenicians. And then outside of the Fertile Crescent, there are still other ethnicities and nations of Semites, including the Arabic peoples who tend to continue to pursue a nomadic life in the Arabian deserts and oases. So in Akkad, one of the things that's most prominent about the story of Akkad is that it is the Akkadians, and in particular the most famous king of the Akkadians, Sargon, who first experiment with an extension of civilization beyond the city-state, beyond the urban community. So we have the city-state of Akkad. One of the disadvantages of planting yourself, and literally planting yourself in one place, becoming dependent upon agricultural yield and being situated in one city, is that you are completely stuck with whatever the local natural resources are. And so if you're low on water, then you have to find a way to bring water in through irrigation, and systems of irrigation are one of the ongoing technological problems of the Sumerian culture. If you're short on timber and you need timber for building and for ships that you move up and down the river or into the ocean or whatever, then you need to bring that in, precious metals for use in the making of bronze or something like this, so forth and so on. Whatever local resources you don't have, you need to get from someplace else. And there are essentially only two ways to do this. One is through long-distance trade, which is the ordinary way of getting distant resources, and this is the main reason why civilizations are invented and situated along the great rivers and on the shores of great seas, so that distant resources can be moved, so that long-distance trade can be undertaken. Or to take direct control over distant resources through conquest. This has the advantage of getting rid of the middleman in whatever trading you're undertaking, and all the tolls and tariffs and cuts and so forth that involves. But it has a profound disadvantage in that it is a huge hassle to conquer people that is a significant distance away, and it is an even greater hassle to rule over them afterwards, to maintain that control. And here's the thing that people don't always realize about the idea of conquest, is that conquest is relatively straightforward if you have the economic power to field a large army that is equipped with sufficient weaponry. And this is why economic power must come before political and military power. You need to be able to support the mechanics of conquest. You need to be able to put an army into the field. You need to be able to have weapons. But most of all, the conquest is relatively straightforward, but domination afterwards is a huge problem, and we're going to be seeing this over and over again. The story of ancient history involves constant experimentation with the nuances, with the dynamics of civilization. We're going to be seeing this over and over again. Every place and time that we visit is going to be involved in experimentations with the relationship between the individual and the community, the relationship between genders, and the relationship between the mortal and the divine, trying to get it right. Each place has a new take on it, a new vision, and each place and time experiments further from what they originally develop, are in a constant state of mutation or evolution. So civilization, over the course of ancient history, the ancient era is defined by experimentation with the idea of civilization. But as a corollary to this, there is also constant experimentation with the need to control distant resources. And so this is done through experimentations in trade, but also through experimentations with the problems of conquest and dominion. So one of the first major individuals to try this and to experience these problems is Sargon of Akkad. Sargon has a relatively simple path to the conquest of most of Mesopotamia and part of Canaan. He takes control of the majority of the Fertile Crescent. The conquest is relatively simple. But what he discovers is that domination is the real problem. And again, this is going to be a recurring theme: conquest and domination as the two problems of empire, and domination being by far the most difficult one. So the characteristics of Sargon's empire: the motivation is control of distant resources. Empire is never undertaken with the sole purpose of a ruler's personal greed or desire for glory. It's just too much trouble. Empire is created for the purpose of control of distant resources. And this is the case in Akkad as elsewhere. It involves the connection of all different kinds of disparate peoples. There in Mesopotamia and northern Canaan and Syria, there are all different kinds of ethnicities. Some Semitic, some peoples that were living there before, and other migrants. Sargon's empire has to connect these peoples. One part of this is autocratic rule, ensuring that everybody in an empire knows that there is a single command, that there is a single sovereignty, that there is a single voice of law and justice, and that the individual cities and communities within this empire have no standing to resist this with militarily or otherwise, that they must submit to the power and authority, literally and figuratively, of the central ruler. The effect of all this is also to create a unified economy. And this is the part where being dominated by an emperor has an upside for the subjects in all the disparate parts of the empire. As a result of having a unified economy, it spreads out, it levels the standard of living to at least some extent. It provides for the movement of all different kinds of goods throughout the empire, which means that people have access to things that are not available locally, and it involves the spread of ideas. that can help to foster and ferment local identity, local expression of identity, and so forth and so on. It involves creating a relationship with the rulers of the local communities that are being ruled over. In other words, each community has its most important person in a personal relationship with the emperor. And this is done so that the most important person, the ruler or prince or whatever of a local community, has a relationship of mutual benefit with the central power, and this allows the local community to through its own through its own prince or whatever to have a sense of symbiotic relationship with the central power, that they're getting something out of it. Usually this takes the form in vassalage of a segment of the province or whatever of the empire supporting the emperor's conquests in return for the emperor's protection of that province or territory and the sharing of the wealth. And so, the downside to all of this is that both the autocratic rule and the personal relationship of vassalage means that this kind of empire is very much dependent upon the character and dynamic of the emperor that sets it up. And so we have the situation in this case that Sargon's empire doesn't last very long beyond Sargon himself. It doesn't outlive him because it's dependent on his personal dynamic. He knits this empire together. He creates relationships with these territories, and when he's gone, the connections fall apart. And so this is one of the challenges of domination, that a system has to develop that persists beyond the individual emperor. There needs to be an institutionalization in some way, whether it's formal or informal. And so we'll see time and time again the would-be empires, successful and unsuccessful, run up against this problem as one of the greatest challenges of making an empire that is able to fulfill its promise. In a way, one of the best examples of this succeeding is Egypt. Egypt is essentially an empire that's created when the ruler of Upper Egypt conquers Lower Egypt and creates a unified empire of the Nile. And this empire is able to succeed because the idea of the pharaoh and his role as a manifestation of the god Horus and of the nurturing, benevolent nature of the gods is more prominent than the character of the individual pharaohs. And so the Akkadians and later the Babylonians are eventually subsume and absorb the Sumerian culture. So in the process, they swallow many elements of Sumerian heritage and worldview. The idea of striving to succeed in this life because the afterlife is unimportant. The idea of the ziggurat and the relationship with the patron deity, and even the specific work of the specific technology of cuneiform, which is the earliest form of writing in this part of the world. One of the problems of this is that the cuneiform writing system is developed for the Sumerian language and the Semitic languages. of Akkad and Babylon are radically different in structure and philosophy from the Sumerian language, as well as in the mechanics of what sounds are used and the approach to conjugation and declension and so forth. And as a result, writing becomes significantly harder for the Semitic peoples that are using Sumerian cuneiform in the Bronze Age than it had been for the Sumerians. Writing in cuneiform in a Semitic language becomes much more difficult. It requires a huge amount of training, and the cuneiform itself is designed to be increasingly abstract and unintuitive. And so the result of this is that the Semitic peoples develop a class of scribe whose job it is to maintain information, and these become powerful in their own right because of their control of literacy. In the course of the Bronze Age, the power shifts progressively further north, and so we see the earliest manifestation of Babylon as what becomes the greatest city in the world. All throughout the ancient era, Babylon is remembered as being the epitome of a great city, and this is reflected in its relationship with its deities. Here we see a Babylonian representation of Ishtar, the goddess that corresponds to the ancient Sumerian goddess Inanna of fertility and war, and the patron deity, however, of Babylon is Marduk. Marduk is a much more dark and ominous figure, a god who is depicted as being extremely powerful and extremely ruthless. And this is part of the reputation that Babylon seeks to foster for itself. And so the role of Marduk in establishing Babylonian culture and the Babylonian psyche develops dramatically over the course of the history of Babylon. One of the key moments of Babylonian history in the Bronze Age, of the Old Babylonian Empire, is the development of the Code of Hammurabi. This is one of the first examples of a written law code, one that is available for anyone involved in the legal process, and the Hammurabi Code. One of the key things that's important for you to ask yourself is, what is the significance of having a law code in and of itself? Why would this be important? When you're talking about an empire in particular, and once again we're talking about the Old Babylonian Empire, which is another effort to unite all of Mesopotamia under a single ruler. In this case, one of these rulers is Hammurabi. You have a lot of different traditions that are in conflict with each other, which, in terms of law, in terms of crime, in terms of relationships between peoples, in terms of conflicts between individuals, this creates a great deal of tension and friction. And so it's hugely beneficial to create a standardized legal system. And this is also because it provides a standard where everybody knows what to expect. This is one of the ways in which people can feel that it's a positive thing that they're a part of an empire. And so as a result, people know what to expect from justice. Justice is not defined by the arbitrary decisions of individual judges or by the arbitrary traditions of individual cities. This is also something that once it becomes a standard thing that is out in the open, the public can feel that it has ownership of it. And this is something, this is a kind of a sense of empowerment of the masses that encourages a unified and positive sense of identity across a variegated empire. And finally, it helps to every way in which the collective identity can overrule, can break the ties that people have to their local communities, to their extended families, and everything else that ties them to the local soil. This is something that benefits the empire as a whole. This is something that makes the collective empire that much more powerful. And so, this is, the movements within the Eastern Mediterranean, within the Fertile Crescent, and all through this area throughout the Bronze Age, continue. The Eastern Mediterranean world is in regular motion throughout the Bronze Age, and we'll be seeing the repercussions of this ongoing as we proceed. And that's that.